Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited about this. It's been such a long time in the making for me to finally put out Art Talk Music. This is the podcast where we have conversations with all kinds of people, interesting artists, people that are involved in the arts, talking like poets, like comedians, like storytellers, like music. I mean, really everything. Not even totally confined to those things, but that's absolutely kind of very important things for me as far as the way my life has come to be. And I'm so grateful to put this podcast out to you and celebrate the beautiful thing that is creativity and getting to create things like a beautiful painting or a magnificent monumental sculpture. It's going to be a podcast where you can expect to hear from people of all walks of life, from older people to younger people, from creative people to people that have a regular job that are also creative. And it's going to be a wonderful opportunity to get to talk with people that I've always wanted to talk to and get deeper into conversations and allow myself to learn. I'm so excited for this process. My name is Claudio Toulouse, and I'm a guitarist, I'm a singer, I'm a songwriter, I'm an artist, I'm a sculptor, and I grew up around all of that. You know, my father's a painter and a sculptor, and he's a guitar player and a singer. And, I come from a really large family on top of the fact that there's all varieties of different people. And, when you have creative uncles and aunts and people that are just doing amazing things, it inspires you to want to try and do anything you really want to do. And so I'm grateful for the life that I've lived to be able to have met such interesting people, like some of the most, inspirational artists that I've come to meet and seen that are working today and showing their artwork today. Continuing to meet amazing musicians and hear amazing music as I travel the world and travel the country. I mean, there's so much interesting stuff that I feel like could use even just a tiny bit more spotlight. And it's going to be amazing to really bring these conversations to you, to wherever you are, whatever you're doing. If you're walking, if you're commuting, if you're doing whatever you're doing, I'm so glad that you tuned in and that you're going to get to go on this journey with us. The journey that is Art Talk Music. And so what is my creative side? I mean, what does a podcast mean for me? I mean, a podcast is like the biggest opportunity to do something that I've always wanted to do, which is have conversations with people. I mean, I feel like more than reading about someone, more than diving into their art, although you learn so much about someone when you dive into their art, having a conversation one-on-one with someone, I mean, there's nothing like it. And, what better way to truly show you who someone is than to have a conversation with them over an hour, over a half hour, over 2 hours. And it's something that I've admired seeing people do in podcasts or even just, conversations as they happen at universities and in different places around the country and around the world. Why not put something else out? And I'm so glad that I finally pushed record because it's something that like anything. I mean, you always want to do things and you have goals and aspirations, and then you've got procrastination creeping on you at every turn. I mean, you wake up and you say, today's the day, I'm going to do this. And then it's not. And then you feel like shit when you think about it. But that's okay. It's just about starting again. Every single day you get a chance to start anew. So this podcast is going to be awesome. I mean, I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So there's a lot of creative people all around here. Specifically, Santa Fe, New Mexico is one of the biggest art communities outside of Los Angeles and New York in the world. And that's pretty special. I mean, that's the reason that my family moved here. And I look forward to having such awesome conversations with beautiful artists that I admire and new artists that I haven't met yet, but I look forward to meeting. And musicians. There's all kinds of musicians that have traveled to New Mexico. It's almost become, I don't want to say like a retirement home, but it definitely is an amazing place to come and settle down once all the chaos is past. Even though really chaos continues until the day we die. Well, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But New Mexico has this calm and this stillness about it that is like no other place, and it captures certain people's heart. And a lot of musicians have traveled through New Mexico, and they set up tent once they're ready. They say, oh yeah, that one place was really peaceful. The sunsets, the green chili, the red chili. This podcast in some ways also came from this series that came out from one of our local radio stations called KUNM. And I believe the series was called Jazz of Enchantment. And the series had 2 sides, or 2 CDs as it was, and it was filled with conversations that were anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes long. Maybe not 10 minutes long, but they were a couple minutes long, giving you little portraits, little snapshots into so many of New Mexico's wonderful and recognized jazz musicians. And I mean, this podcast doesn't have to do just with any one genre of music. I mean, it's about music in general. I mean, we might even have, podcasts in Spanish, and you'll just have to learn Spanish or maybe not listen to that one. But it's something that I look forward to doing as far as exploring what music, what art, and talking, like what all those things have in common, like what the thread is. And obviously it is conversation, but conversing about those things, maybe those things leading to inspiration or talking about inspiration, and hopefully that can spark something in someone else. I mean, I know that happened a lot for me, and I know that's why I listen to podcasts and why I go down the path of listening to so many things over so many different years, of jazz podcast, of music, different, check out NPR podcast, of comedians podcast, which definitely has won out my heart over the last couple of years. I mean, without a doubt, comedians have some of the best podcasts. Obviously, their ability to rant and talk is like none other, but their ability to, bless each other's balls, as it is to say, it's amazing. I love it. And I look forward to having some comedians on here. It's something that I say, why not? So something else that this podcast has to do with is the amount of time that I spend on the road. And podcasts nowadays, with the wonderful evolution of technology, is such an easy thing to pick up and do wherever you are. And I look forward to doing that. My family's from Colombia, and so I travel to Colombia quite a bit. And I look forward to having conversations with people in English and in Spanish over there, and talking with artists. I mean, this podcast is also going to have a video aspect of it. Hopefully the live thing will come soon, as well as, clips that have to do with this specific show that you're being a part of, and getting some video footage that connects you even further with everything and with some of the people that I bring on the show. I have a soft spot for going to New Orleans. So that's an amazing city that I have to say I'm in at least about a month to 2 months, maybe even 3 months a year, just, counting up the days, the weekends, the weeks that I'm there. And it steals my heart every time. I mean, that city is amazing. If you've not been to New Orleans, I'm telling you right now, you need to stop what you're doing, put that on your vacation plans, and get out there pronto. And don't go just for Jazz Fest or Mardi Gras. Those are amazing things to experience, but go experience New Orleans for what it is. I mean, I always tell people that the 3 reasons are each enough reason to go to New Orleans, which is the food, the culture, and the music. And so I look forward to going to New Orleans soon in the next couple of months and doing some podcasts in New Orleans. I have a lot of friends that are amazing musicians doing awesome stuff. And I'm part of an amazing record label called Bubble Bath Records. And I'm excited to, get in with them and have some podcasts with some of the founders of the record label, as well as a lot of the artists who were good friends of mine. I also have a love for music from other parts of the world. And so I hope to continue traveling to other parts of the world and getting podcasts from those places. But, one step at a time. I'm just grateful that this podcast is something that can actually be now, and it can be out in the world, and you can enjoy this. Because it's basically just an opportunity to put a conversation out your way. And I hope what you hear is something you find interesting, and you might come back. Now, music is probably the biggest of the things for me, meaning it occupies the most space in my creative mind, in my daily life. Nowadays I do a lot of traveling, so not as much, but it's occupied my years of existence in institutional studies and it's occupied my desires and my heart's want. And I studied music from early on. I got into it when I was in 6th grade, and I started studying in middle school with this awesome teacher, Bill Brodsky, and took lessons with him, and eventually went on to a high school to meet, this guy that I would eventually consider my uncle, Mike, and that's Michael Anthony, who's a special gentleman and, what many consider to be the dean of jazz guitar in the Southwest, and was a studio session player in LA back in the day, and recorded on such things like the Flintstones and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and all these wonderful things that accredit him to be this absolutely versatile wizard on the guitar and at life. I mean, when you study jazz and when you dedicate yourself to a craft, that folds over into your life. And he was so much more than just a music teacher and a guitar teacher. And I studied with him through high school, and also did some choir and did a little bit of band as far as I pushed a helicopter, I pushed a little airplane as part of the marching band's competition one time, and played with the drum line, played the guitar part for an Edgar Winter Group song. And then I went on to study at the university. And of course I wanted to study music. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do all my life. And so I didn't want to study classical music, even though I love classical music, but the classical guitar is a totally different thing than quote unquote a jazz guitar. But I mean, really, I love all guitar. I grew up listening to Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I grew up, in a Colombian household. So I had Latin music playing and cumbias, and I had boleros. My dad loved romantic music, like tangos as well. And so I had a big mix of musics and upbringings, but the opportunity to study music as a degree was like, oh, absolutely, yes, without a doubt. I mean, and to some degree, I wish I would have studied something like psychology, because I knew I was going to continue into music, but having studied something like psychology would have, I felt like, put me in a place to be able to do with what at that time I had wanted to do with my my musical talents was to do music therapy, which is kind of like art therapy, even though, there's all kinds of different forms of music therapy and arts therapy. But we'll get into that. That's a podcast in itself, probably many podcasts, because that was my reason for a trip down to Cape Town, South Africa in my last year at the University of New Mexico. So studying at the university was interesting just because, you know what you want to do. You don't really want to be studying and doing all these homework assignments. You just want to play. And I'd been already playing out and making a little bit of a living doing it. And I started doing it more and more as I got into my university studies. And it really eventually became school for me. I mean, more so in the sense of learning how to play on the stage with musicians who have been doing it their whole life, not throwing out lessons to me via homework assignments, but through real-time experiences that made me realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't play that over that, or maybe that was the wrong chord to not support the melody, and that's what, made him give me a dirty look. But studying music in the university allowed me an opportunity to travel. The wonderful thing about studying is being able to do exchange programs, if it's international or national. And my first trip, or my first opportunity to do an exchange, was a national student exchange over to the University of New Orleans back in 2012. And what that did for me, not just as a musician, but as a human being, was probably the biggest leap that I'd made in my growth as an adult, as an artist, as a man. And, I stayed there for a semester. I really should have stayed there a whole year, but it was amazing to be there and experience that. And then I came back to University of New Mexico and finished out that year. And the following year is when I'd go to South Africa and study in Cape Town. And all the while that I studied and that I was learning and playing at night venues and stuff, the most valuable part of all of that were the conversations I was able to have with those people and the little tidbits of wisdom that seeped through their anecdotes, seeped through their stories of that time that they got too drunk playing this bar and their whole band got kicked out. Whether it be something intentional of someone trying to bring a message to you because there's a microphone in front of their face, or just speaking about their life experience, this platform is something that I look forward to bringing what I value most to you and to anyone that chooses to listen to this. And for that, I'm really grateful. And for podcasting, I'm really grateful. I've always wanted to I've really always wanted to talk. I love the opportunity to talk. Really, I could do a Bill Burr type podcast where I just talk every Monday morning and go through all the things that have been happening or the news. And, it's just wonderful to have these gems also being able to be out there in the world and stay out there, so that when some of these amazing musicians that I've met and had wonderful conversations with and relationships with pass on to the other side, those conversations are still here with us. And we can go back and listen to their voice and hear how they explain that story of the time that they got picked up to go hear Jimi Hendrix play at Woodstock or whatever. Now, besides music, art is probably, my foundation. More so than music, in the sense that, my dad wanted to name me after his favorite French painter, which was Toulouse-Lautrec. He wanted to name me Henri Marie Raymond de Toulouse-Lautrec. And my mom was like, hell no, people are going to call him Henry. No offense to any Henrys out there, but my mother and father decided on Claudio Toulouse. And my father, being an artist, always infused that love of music and of art into us. And so from a young age, he had us noodling and doing, activities that later I'd realize could be manifested into making sculptures if I wanted to, or drawing something, or making a big mural, really whatever you want to do, you put your mind to. And so art, and this podcast is called Art Talk Music, not just because it sounds good together like that, but because art was the foundation of, the home that I was birthed into. And talking, how can that not be, the first thing that is the music to our ears as babies in our mother's womb? the sound of our mother's voice is like a sweet song. And so that talk and that music, I mean, it lays the foundation of why I call this podcast Art Talk Music. And I'll definitely have my father, on the podcast down the road, way down the road. And some of my siblings, it's just something that I look forward to exploring more in the podcast to come and sharing stories about that and about my upbringing. But I mean, really just conversing. Now, I think that I've spoken enough for an intro podcast. I really thank you for listening. And I look forward to bringing you so much content, hopefully up to 2 podcasts a week. And until then, thank you so much. This is Claudio Toulouse with Art Talk Music.